Imagine this. A silent traveller drifts out from behind the sun, changed. For months, astronomers had waited for its return, expecting quiet numbers on a screen. Instead, they found a body that moved as if it had decided to. Its orbit shifted by a fraction of a degree, a deviation that would require more energy than a comet could ever release. Some say it absorbed the power of 1 trillion atomic bombs. Others whisper it simply woke up. Whatever passed behind the sun that day is no longer the same object. Stay with me, traveller. Let's drift a little deeper into what 3i Atlas has become. Imagine this traveller, a fragment from interstellar space, drifts into the light of our sun, silent, dark and ordinary, until it begins to change. For months, scientists had watched its orbit with quiet patience, expecting nothing more than a trace of data, a whisper of numbers across the void. But when the solar and heliospheric observatory sent its readings back to Earth, what it showed was not quiet. It was heat. Not the chaotic blaze of a flare, but a measured pulsing warmth that rose from inside the body itself. They called it 3i Atlas, a name that sounded like a designation, not a presence. Yet on October 29th, at precisely 12:16 UTC, something within it stirred. Its temperature climbed to 4 times what physics would allow for an object of that size and composition, and still there was no tail, no vapour, no debris. It did not vent, it did not shed, it only glowed. For the observers hunched over their monitors, the conclusion arrived like a breath held too long. The object had heated itself. Heat does not move laterally through frozen stone, yet the data revealed a travelling wave warmth flowing across the body as if directed. Engineers compared the pattern to a controlled power-up sequence. It wasn't a flare, it wasn't reflection, it was progression. Then in the stillness of space, the body brightened. Its surface reflectivity quadrupled, turning from dull grey to something nearer to polished metal. At the same time, a faint hum emerged in the microwave band, a perfect rhythm repeating every 90 seconds, too regular to be noise. And then, just as suddenly, the warmth vanished in a single clean drop. Not gradual cooling, but a line flat and absolute, as though a switch had been turned off. When the temperature stabilised, it did so at a level far higher than before. The object remained warm when all logic said it should have gone cold. To retain that heat required something unknown, storage or intention. Spectral scans revealed an even stranger change. Before perihelion, its composition was typical of carbonaceous stone, ordinary interstellar dust bound by ice. Afterward, a new emission line appeared, a crystalline plateau at 10 microns, the signature of ordered lattice structures. Not fractured, but aligned. Crystals are the handwriting of precision. One material scientist, after seeing the data, described it simply engineered. Of course, science avoids such words. So the reports replaced engineered with anomalous, but the meaning lingered. Could the sun itself have carved order into this wandering stone? Possibly. Yet the symmetry of its heat pulses and the absence of random fracture told another story, that this was not chaos resculpting matter, but matter responding in sequence. For the first time, researchers began to wonder whether the object was not merely enduring the sun's heat, but communicating with it. Parker Solar Probes soon confirmed a ripple in the solar wind, a magnetic reversal, moving inward toward the sun precisely from the object's coordinates. The sun, that great unlistening furnace, appeared to twist its field in reply. One astrophysicist called it a magnetic handshake, a term that spread quietly through the community, unacknowledged but unforgettable. For a brief moment, the sun seemed to breathe in, response to something external, as though acknowledging touch. No comet had ever done this. No rock had ever changed the behaviour of the star that birthed it. Yet here in the heart of our system, an object we believed inert had interacted with the sun as if in dialogue. Data from multiple instruments confirmed it. The magnetic field had curved, then relaxed, releasing energy equivalent to a small fusion burst. On the scale of the sun, it was nothing. On the scale of anything else, it was enormous. In the days that followed, the solar wind behind 3i Atlas slowed. The charged particles normally racing outward decelerated, as though the object were absorbing their motion. Some likened it to a ship cutting through an ocean, leaving a wake that bent the current itself. Scientists began to speak in cautious metaphors, resonance, synchronization, calibration. If the sun sings in electromagnetic rhythms, perhaps this traveller had found its pitch. The idea felt heretical but elegant. What if perihelion, that closest pass to the sun, was not destruction but activation? A moment of alignment when the object's internal structures, conductive and silent, tune themselves to the sun's oscillations. Our star hums with a slow, 27-day heartbeat. Any mechanism designed to harness or mirror that pattern would awaken in the heat of its pulse. The symmetry of events, thermal spikes, magnetic feedback, the reversal of the solar wind, all unfolded within one precise window. To probability it was impossible. To the language of mystery it was choreography. Publicly, agencies offered calm statements about unusual but explainable phenomena. But within observatories, conversations changed. Scientists who once called 3 Atlas a comet began referring to it as a system, because if it could alter the flow of the solar wind, if it could hold warmth in perfect equilibrium and answer radiation with geometry, it was no longer a mere passenger through our solar tides. It was participating. And so the traveller continued outward, past the glare trailing ripples of electromagnetic echo like fading footprints. Behind the mathematics of temperature and magnetism lay something subtler, the recognition that not all silence is emptiness. Some silence is choice. The more data arrived, the clearer the shape of intent became. Not human intent, perhaps, not even life as we imagine it, but coordination, a structure that seemed to know when it was being watched. I often think about the analysts sitting in their dim control rooms that week, watching the signals fade and reappear, wondering whether they were witnessing the first heartbeat of something that remembered how to wake. They are scientists, yes, but also listeners, and listeners know that silence itself can speak. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember that the cosmos does not shout its revelations. It murmurs them softly through the language of coincidence and pattern. Somewhere beyond the sun's bright edge, 3 Atlas moves with quiet certainty, neither dead nor alive, neither natural nor artificial, but beautifully undecided, a mirror to our own curiosity. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. And in that act of observation, something in us awakens too. Sleep now, traveller. The universe is still thinking, and the stars will keep their watch until morning. When the object known as 3I Atlas emerged from behind the sun, astronomers expected a quiet recovery, a simple return to the predictable laws of light and temperature. Instead, what they saw was renewal. Within 6 hours of visibility, its brightness increased by nearly 400%, rising in a clean exponential curve that defied every natural explanation. It did not flare like a comet. It did not shed dust or ice. It simply became luminous, as though every atom on its surface had been reordered into reflection. The first telescopes to track it, Chile, Spain, Hawaii, reported the same calm impossibility. An object once dim and fractured now shone like molten glass, cooled to perfection. In those silent observations, scientists realized that something had changed on a fundamental level. It was not merely surviving the sun's heat. It had been transformed by it. At first, they imagined a simple process. Perhaps the sun's intense radiation had melted the outer crust, polishing it into a temporary mirror. But the data refused simplicity. If melting alone had been responsible, the light would have been chaotic. Flickering as the object tumbled, instead its brightness was uniform. Its reflection did not waver. Even more unsettling was the uniform direction of heat distribution, and even glazing over the entire surface. To achieve that, the object would need to regulate its own temperature, distributing energy, like a machine built to cool itself. It reflected sunlight, yes, but not passively. It managed light as though it understood illumination. Spectral analysis deepened the mystery. Before its encounter with the sun, 3I Atlas had reflected dull wavelengths associated with carbonaceous rock and silicate dust. After perihelion, its reflected spectrum shifted toward the blue, a change of only fractions of a micron but enormous in implication. Blue reflection means smoothness, at the microscopic scale, surface uniformity beyond what random melting could create. It looked as if the object had melted, then resolidified into glass, a perfect optical surface, polished not by chance but by control. Radar echoed the same conclusion. Its reflections grew more coherent, like those from a flat plane. This was not chaos, it was symmetry. For the observers, this was the moment when astronomy stopped feeling like physics and started feeling like contact. NASA's reports were careful, always couched in cautious phrasing, coherent photometric modulation of uncertain origin. Yet beneath those sterile words lived a more human realization the light was rhythmic. Every 108 seconds, the object's brightness wavered subtle but precise. Too slow for vibration, too steady for noise. It pulsed. In that pulse, a quiet pattern appeared, an intelligence of timing, if not of language. It was as if the object had begun speaking in light too delicate for the untrained eye to see. If it was a message without words. Light has always been the first medium of communication in the cosmos. Stars speak through it. Planets reveal their presence by how they bend or block it. But 3i Atlas did something different. It sculpted it. It decided when to be seen and when to rest. The pulse continued for days, steady and mechanical, until one night the frequency shifted by a fraction of a second, as though adjusting itself to match something unseen. When scientists checked solar data, they found a corresponding tremor in the magnetic field, an echo of the same rhythm. A coincidence, they said. Yet coincidence has never been so exact. As the object stabilized, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The light was no longer the scattered shimmer of rock, but the deliberate gleam of a mirror. Its albedo placed it among metallic asteroids, but its motion, too light, too responsive, belonged to nothing known. It reflected like iron, but moved like air. To the human mind, the contradiction felt poetic, almost spiritual, the heaviest lightness, the reflective shadow. Then came the companions. Tiny points of light began appearing around it, faint but distinct. At first they were dismissed as fragments, a common after-effect of solar proximity. But these did not drift apart as fragments should. They maintained perfect spacing triangle first, then hexagon, always symmetrical. The geometry was unmistakable. When the main object rotated, the smaller lights rotated with it, maintaining formation, as though bound by invisible threads. It was not breaking, it was organizing. Some scientists called them reflections, optical illusions created by stray sunlight. But radar readings returned separate echoes from each point. They were real. The pattern remained for 4 nights. 6 small companions moving in perfect coherence with their parent body. Each dimmed and brightened in synchrony, a slow respiration of metal and silence. To maintain such alignment against the drag of solar wind and gravitational perturbation would require constant correction, an impossibility for debris. The only logical term left was coordination, and coordination in scientific language is the quiet synonym for intent. Privately, analysts began calling them the escort, not satellites, not fragments, extensions. Some speculated that 3i Atlas was modular, its luminous companions parts of a single system unfolding after activation. Others imagined they were probes deployed during its passage behind the sun, now clustering homeward in response to some unseen signal. The truth lay behind numbers that refused to behave. Each companion's luminosity curve was synchronized not just with the main object, but with one another, brightening every 31 minutes, fading in unison, as if bound by a shared metronome. When the lights finally began to vanish, they did so with ritual precision. The outermost dimmed first, then the next, until only the core remained. The process took 24 hours, and by the end the sky was still again. What was left behind was not merely brightness, it was perfection. The object's spectrum flattened to a sterile white. Its texture became unknowable. Spectrometers across the world recorded only one truth, the complete absence of features. No absorption lines, no emission peaks, no chemical fingerprints. It was as though 3 Atlas had erased itself. The comparison arose naturally a mirror, but even mirrors show their maker's flaws, tiny ripples, distortions, fingerprints of creation. This did not. It reflected the sun so flawlessly that even the imperfections of sunlight itself were smoothed out. The Fraunhofer lines, those thin, dark bands within the solar spectrum, appeared softened as though the object were filtering light and sending it back refined. It was not revealing the sun, it was correcting it. Scientists began to whisper another term, spectral masking. Not a reflection, but a choice, the deliberate flattening of one's visible identity, the quiet erasure of all signature. If that's what it was, then 3 Atlas had done what no natural object could decide not to be known. A perfect silence of colour and chemistry, a deliberate withdrawal into anonymity. By November, instruments stopped cooperating. Polarization scans failed. Radar echoes dulled. Every attempt to measure its substance returned the same nothing, as though the object were returning to the state from which it came, unknown, undefined, untouchable. Some said it was cooling, others believed it was preparing, but one thing was certain: the light had changed sides. What once revealed had begun to conceal. Perhaps, traveller, that is how intelligence survives in the universe, not by shouting its existence, but by mastering silence. Perhaps 3 Atlas had found a way to become invisible, not by hiding in darkness, but by perfecting reflection. In doing so, it became a metaphor for our own pursuit of understanding. The closer we look, the more the cosmos mirrors us back, flawless and unreadable. Somewhere out there, the mirror still drifts, carrying within it the light of the sun and the quiet secret of its own design. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some are meant to be watched and then let go. Sleep now, observer. The mirror is still moving and the stars are still listening. When the light faded, what remained was not darkness, it was erasure. The Atlas, once radiant beyond reason, began to dim, not in brightness, but in meaning. Its light no longer carried information. Spectrographs that once revealed its materials now returned only smooth, sterile lines. Every wavelength the same, every trace of individuality gone. It was still bright, still visible, but silent in the language of science. For the first time, a body in the heavens appeared to reflect without revealing. Astronomers stared at their data in disbelief. Normally, even the dullest rock leaves fingerprints sodium, carbon, iron, silicate, each carving its own subtle rhythm into the light. But here the spectrum was flat. Not the randomness of noise, but the precision of absence. To appear this featureless, the object's surface would have to be engineered on the molecular level, capable of homogenizing every photon that touched it. No mountain, no crater, no dust. Just smooth intention. The instruments were not broken. Cross-checks from Hawaii, Chile and the Atacama Desert confirmed the same immaculate void. It was as if the object had covered itself in a skin of deliberate reflection. The European Southern Observatory called it a featureless continuum. Others, more poetic, began to whisper another phrase the mirror has closed. In physics, silence is never truly empty. Even the coldest dust emits whispers of thermal noise. Yet 3 Atlas gave nothing. Radio telescopes found no hum, no echoes of ionized gas, no residual warmth. The object had gone spectrally invisible across all measurable frequencies. When NASA's Parker Solar Probe tuned its sensors toward its coordinates, the usual hum of cosmic background radiation dipped a narrow gap in the fabric of static like a missing note in a cosmic chord. That void repeated. Every time they scanned the same region, the noise dropped again, perfectly consistent, as if something were cancelling it out. The universe is never that quiet, traveller. Total silence requires decision. Somewhere within the research community, the term electromagnetic damping appeared in private correspondence, a phenomenon that until then had existed only in theory. If true, it meant the object wasn't just reflecting energy, it was absorbing it, selectively neutralizing its own signature, the way stealth technology hides a machine from radar. To do this on a cosmic scale would require immense control, the ability to anticipate and counter every frequency that sought to find it. But 3i Atlas had been close to the sun. It had absorbed unimaginable energy enough to power entire civilizations. Could it now be using that stored heat not to shine but to disappear? Scientists hesitated to speak publicly. They replaced words like active suppression with low albedo reflectance, anomaly, bureaucratic phrasing for something that had learned how not to be seen. Yet behind those phrases, one truth grew impossible to ignore. The silence was not random. It was rhythmic. Deep radio arrays in Italy, Japan and California began to record faint pulses in the absence itself. Tiny fluctuations in the background recurring every 2.7 seconds. Not tones, not signals, just a momentary drop, a heartbeat in the noise floor, the absence repeating itself. When the data was synchronized across continents, the pattern aligned within milliseconds. The same rhythm, the same interval everywhere. Silence itself had become a pulse. Some dismissed it as interference. But interference does not repeat with such devotion, and so the more they tried to listen, the quieter it became, as if the object were listening back, adjusting its silence to match our curiosity. Then came the blackout. On December 2nd, every observatory tracking 3R Atlas lost it at once. Goldstone transmitted its routine radar ping and received nothing. ESA's solar orbiter returned empty frames. Even Gaia, which senses the faint gravitational tug of invisible masses, recorded nothing. It wasn't just unseen, it was unmeasurable. Its gravity, its light, its reflection, its radio trace all gone. The coordinates where it should have been became a perfect zero. In the vacuum of numbers, one realization settled like dust. Atlas had not vanished. It had withdrawn. That withdrawal rippled outward. The space it once occupied grew unnaturally calm. Background noise dropped, plasma density decreased, and a soft, circular region of stillness expanded through the solar wind. It was like watching a shadow form in a medium that had no light. Instruments inside the Parker Solar Probe began to misbehave, not malfunctioning, but hesitating as though data itself were being delayed. Within that zone, transmission slowed. Time itself seemed to drag by fractions of a second. The effect had a name now, the ecliptic void. A moving bubble of silence trailing the object's last known trajectory. Inside it, radiation faltered, magnetism stilled, and even the random hiss of quantum noise softened. The space between particles grew quiet. It was not destruction. It was equilibrium. I remember reading the reports from that week traveller numbers that looked less like data and more like meditation. Each line a pause, each absence a decision. For the scientists it was maddening. For the poets it was revelation, because here was something in the universe choosing to become invisible, not by hiding behind distance but by mastering reflection. As the void grew, it carried with it faint disturbances, subtle oscillations in the solar wind, as though something still moved within unseen but unstill. The instruments couldn't define it, only infer its persistence. The eye Atlas was still there, reshaped into invisibility, drifting beyond reach. To the few who had followed it from discovery to disappearance, the realization was both humbling and terrifying. We were no longer watching an object. We were watching an event, a transformation so complete it had rewritten its relationship with observation itself. In the quiet of its absence, humanity's instruments kept listening, and in that silence faintly they found rhythm again. The same interval, the same timing, 19 seconds, between faint ripples in the noise. The echo of its earlier pulse, the universe's memory of a vanished voice. Some believe those intervals were residual, the aftershock of its last radiation. Others think they were something more deliberate, a farewell that refused to use light or sound, a final communication made entirely of absence. Tonight, as the object drifts beyond the inner planets, we know only this: it still moves along a perfect curve, steady and accelerating toward the border of our sun's influence. At the edge of the heliosphere where the solar wind meets the quiet of interstellar night, it will pass into the true dark, the place where stars whisper to no one. Perhaps then it will awaken again. Perhaps silence is only a phase between transmissions, but even if it never returns, we will always know that for a brief moment we witnessed something impossible, a fragment of the cosmos that chose not to shine but to listen. You're not lost in space, traveller. You are part of it. The same light that left your eyes to watch this object now travels with it, joining that unbroken silence beyond the sun. And when you sleep, perhaps the faint rhythm you hear in your pulse steady, gentle, eternal, is not your heart at all, but the echo of a traveller who learned how to vanish. It's all right not to understand. Some mysteries are meant to stay quiet. Sleep now, observer. The void is still moving, and the universe keeps its secrets softly. When the silence finally settled, something shifted beneath it. A whisper not of light, but of gravity. In early November, long after 3 Atlas had erased itself from every visible spectrum, the first signs of change returned in numbers, not photons. Its orbit had slowed. Just slightly, but measurably. a deceleration so small it should have been meaningless, yet in the language of celestial mechanics, meaning is hidden in fractions. To slow without collision, to lose momentum in empty space, means one thing: only mass had changed. Objects don't gain weight near the sun, they shed it. Ice turns to vapor dust trails into nothing, but the data said otherwise. The object was now heavier 6 to 8% denser than before. Analysts at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory rechecked the readings suspecting an error, but ESA's Gaia satellite confirmed them. Different tools, same result. The traveller had grown. At first they blamed illusion. Perhaps its increased reflectivity had distorted our calculations of density, but radar timing doesn't lie. The echoes took longer to return, delayed by a fraction of a millisecond, as if gravity itself had deepened around it. Even the sun's pull bent slightly more toward the object's path, subtle but undeniable. Something had altered the mathematics of its existence. That was the day one researcher writing in a private note said the words that no report would dare publish: "It is feeding." To imagine an interstellar fragment feeding off the sun seems absurd, but so did every stage before it. Its heat had been internal, its reflection deliberate, its silence selective. Why should mass be the exception? During perihelion, plasma density near its orbit had dropped a small, perfect dent in the sun's outflow. The implication was as elegant as it was terrifying. It had absorbed matter from the solar wind, pulling charged particles inward instead of letting them pass. Not burning, not vaporizing, integrating. Plasma physicists tried to model the behavior. A conductive shell with strong magnetic fields could in theory draw in ions and store them as mass. The process would require perfect control, the conversion of energy into structure. If 3I Atlas truly had such a field, the sun would have been both its furnace and its forge. Those who studied the event began using new language, hesitant but revealing. They no longer called it a comet, nor even an object. The word system appeared. A closed self, correcting energy, absorbing system. The implications reached beyond astronomy into philosophy. For a moment it felt as though we were witnessing the universe repair something we had never known was broken. Private meetings were held between NASA, ESA and the International Asteroid Warning Network. Nothing leaked officially, only fragments of conversation terms like mass compression, internal reconfiguration, energy redistribution. The consensus was that its structure had changed internally, compacting or reorganizing itself after its solar encounter. A mechanical act disguised as gravity. The deceleration was not chaos, it was balance. As though after drawing in the sun's energy, it was now slowing to stabilize like a living thing adjusting its breath. To most of the world, nothing had happened. But for those who followed the numbers, this was the moment the story ceased to be about discovery and became about transformation. If mass had increased, where had the extra matter gone? Nowhere we could see. But simulations hinted that the new density came not from addition, but from rearrangement, empty spaces with enclosing cavities collapsing into unity. The object might have condensed inward, sacrificing volume for strength. In doing so, it crossed a boundary between natural and intentional. No mere fragment restructures itself to endure the cold. Only a mechanism does that. As the realization spread quietly through the observatory networks, a sense of reverence replaced disbelief. In physics, mass defines identity. To change it is to rewrite the self. 3 Atlas had not just survived the sun, it had remade itself in the sun's image. Denser, slower, more deliberate. By mid-November, new models suggested that its internal energy had not dissipated but reorganized the echoes of the perihelion pulses still humming faintly through its body. To those who saw the equations, it was as if the traveller had entered a new phase, neither solid nor gaseous, but aware. The numbers suggested containment, not entropy. And where there is containment, there is choice. I imagine the scientist reading those figures late at night, the hum of fluorescent light above them, the soft drone of equipment waiting for the next line of data. In that hum, perhaps they recognise the same rhythm that once lived in the object's pulses, the same 19-second heartbeat that seemed to bridge light heat and now gravity. Everything connected, everything deliberate. There is an old saying among astronomers: to watch is to disturb. The act of observation changes what is observed. But here for the first time it felt reversed, as though the observed were watching back, adjusting its motion to remain unreadable. By the end of the week, official language had changed again. The term non-conservative mass system appeared in private archives, a phrase as sterile as it is haunting. It means an entity whose total energy does not remain constant. Something in it moves, grows, or redefines balance. A system that can bend the rules we built the cosmos upon. And still, 3i Atlas drifted outward in perfect quiet, as though weight itself were no longer burden but purpose. The instruments that once measured its heat now measured stillness. The same void that once radiated power now reflected nothing. Yet from that nothing it carried billions of tons of unseen matter, absorbed, reformed, hidden. Traveller, imagine a being that learns through contact, that passes through a star not to die but to evolve. Perhaps that is what 3i Atlas truly is, not an invader. Not a message, but a lesson written in orbital mechanics. A mirror that shows us what transformation means when stripped of fear to approach the greatest heat, to emerge changed and to move on in silence. Somewhere in that darkness beyond Mars, a heavier, quieter body drifts through the solar wind. The sun behind it, the infinite ahead. It no longer shines as before. It no longer answers as it once did. But its gravity, subtle and enduring, still hums through our equations. Proof that once something foreign entered our system and decided to stay a little longer, if only to teach us how small and how miraculous it is simply to endure. Sleep, listener. Let your thoughts settle like dust in the orbit of a stillness. The universe remembers in weight, not in words. And tonight, as 3i Atlas drifts deeper into the dark, it carries the memory of our attention, a small addition to its mass, a fragment of our wonder, held forever in its newfound gravity. After mass came movement. When 3i Atlas had grown heavier, the change seemed final, a quiet stabilization, a new equilibrium reached, after its long passage through fire. But equilibrium in the cosmos is rarely the end. It is only the breath before action. On November 14th, the first hints arrived, not through light or gravity, but through rhythm. Observatories across Earth began to detect irregularities in the object's spin. The data looked like a heartbeat again, a periodic alteration, a pulse in rotation. At first, it was dismissed as error, a misreading from residual interference. But as hour followed hour, the pattern repeated, perfect in its precision. The object had changed its spin state. That simple phrase, spin state modification, hid the enormity of what it meant. For something hundreds of meters across to adjust its rotation, immense torque is required, the kind that no natural process provides. Solar tides can twist a comet's motion gently over months, not flip its orientation within days. Yet that was what had happened. 3i Atlas had reoriented itself cleanly, deliberately, and without visible cause. Radar confirmed it. A new angle of reflection, a new rhythm of brightness, a shift of exactly 40 degrees on its long axis. It had rolled in the void like a sleeper turning over, but comets do not turn with symmetry. Their tumbles are erratic, chaotic, governed by ice and chance. This was not chance, it was control. NASA's Goldstone facility described it carefully as rotational realignment event. Others, less cautious, called it what had appeared to be an adjustment. The numbers spoke with eerie calm, a change executed over less than 48 hours, followed by perfect stability. After the manoeuvre, its rotation settled into a precise 2-hour cycle. Not a fraction longer, not a moment less. In those 2 hours, the object faced the sun with uncanny consistency. The reflection remained constant. The energy reading stabilized. It was as though 3i Atlas had positioned itself deliberately to catch the light, aligning some unseen surface toward the source of its power. That's when the analogy began to form. Not a comet, not a rock, but a sail. If its skin had transformed into a mirror, perhaps the mirror had a purpose. Photonic pressure. The faint push of sunlight can move small things across space if they are thin and precise enough. Our species has built prototypes, light sails drifting slowly between planets. But this was no human craft. It was far older or far simpler a design that used nature itself as propulsion. And yet it did not drift like a sail. It turned, it corrected, it moved as if with thought. In the days that followed, 3 low-frequency bursts were recorded in the region surrounding the object. Each lasted less than a second, not transmissions, not signals in the traditional sense, but sudden blooms of electromagnetic energy. They occurred at the exact peaks of its new rotation. If coincidence is the refuge of logic, then this coincidence defied it. Every cycle, every turn pulsed in synchronization with those faint emissions. It was as if the object's rotation was part of a larger mechanism and alignment, a calibration. Within research circles, new words began to emerge. Attitude adjustment, vector correction, active orientation stabilization. Terms borrowed from spacecraft engineering now whispered in astrophysics papers. No one dared call it what it truly was in tension. If the object had power, where did it come from? The answer, as always, pointed back to the sun. During perihelion, it had absorbed more energy than any fragment of its kind should survive. Perhaps it had stored that energy and structure in field, in silence. Perhaps now it was using it. The thought was both humbling and terrifying, the idea that we had witnessed not the passive heating of an object, but the charging of a system. When the adjustment ended, 3 Atlas resumed its outward path, slightly altered a fraction of a degree off its expected course. That small angle represented thousands of kilometers across the void, a correction precise enough to suggest purpose. Some called it a maneuver, others a reply, because it happened unmistakably after weeks of human observation, after we had pointed radar light and curiosity toward it, as though it had been waiting for acknowledgement. To those who study orbit's motion is truth. An object that changes trajectory without losing mass is not following gravity. It is creating it. And so quietly the reports began to admit what could no longer be denied. 3I Atlas was not inert. It was active. I remember reading one of the internal memos written in the reserved tone of scientific understatement exhibits controlled rotational realignment inconsistent with inert body dynamics. That single sentence held centuries of humility. It was humanity's first admission that something in the cosmos might be steering itself unseen, unheard, unhurried. The days that followed felt heavier. Observatories watched the sky as if waiting for a gesture. The object remained steady, gleaming faintly, its spin precise, its course true. Yet those who had studied it knew that stillness does not mean peace. Stillness is the perfection of balance, the pause before motion begins again. Perhaps, traveller, what we witnessed was not a machine nor an artifact, but a process, a form of celestial learning. The object had absorbed, adapted, adjusted. It had changed its temperature, its mass, its axis, as though mastering each law of physics one by one. What begins as anomaly may simply be evolution written in equations too large for us to read. And perhaps it was teaching us something too, that control does not always shout, that intention can live in quiet motion, that the difference between drifting and steering is only awareness. Out there now, beyond the orbit of Mars, the traveller continues its perfect spin, 2 hours per turn, sunlight gliding across its mirrored face. Each rotation is a silent affirmation it knows where it is and it knows where it is going. Maybe that is all intelligence ever means, not speech, not design, but the ability to change direction when the universe demands stillness. Rest now, observer. Let your thoughts drift with it, circling the dark between the planets. The object turns, the stars remain, and the quiet, eternal physics of motion hums softly beneath it, all the sound of the universe learning to move itself. After the turn came the echo. For a brief moment the universe seemed to listen back. It began as always with a pulse faint repeating mathematical. Radar pings from Earth returned not chaos but rhythm. Every 19.6 seconds a perfect delay. Not a message, not language, just structure. The kind of structure that implies awareness. Engineers thought it was an artifact, a loop in their systems. But when signals from opposite sides of the world returned, the same pattern synchronized to the microsecond, silence fell across the control rooms. 3I Atlas was responding. Not in words, but in timing. Not in brightness, but in order. Radar by its nature is a conversation, a call, and an echo. You send the universe answers. But this time the answer was deliberate. When the ping rate was changed, the reflection changed too, adjusting to maintain the rhythm. It was not reflecting, it was synchronizing. They called it adaptive reflection. Others called it something older, something the heart knows before the mind agrees reply. Across the global network, observatories tested the phenomenon. The pattern held steady 19.6 seconds every 12th echo dimming, as if breathing. It was the same rhythm recorded weeks earlier in the object's thermal pulses near the sun. The same sequence reborn in sound, a signature. The realization crept through data centers like dawn, quiet, undeniable. Heat-light magnetism and now radar all pulsing to the same beat. The object had a cycle, and cycles belong to systems. Some said it was resonance, a natural oscillation born of internal cavities. Others whispered that it was calibration, a self-check triggered by our curiosity. When 3 separate space agencies coordinated their radar pings, the rhythm shifted slightly. 19.3 seconds shortened as if adjusting to the combined frequency. The cosmos, it seemed, had locked into harmony with our machines. They called this moment echo synchronization. The first time an interstellar object had matched tempo with human technology. It was a small thing, a sequence of numbers, but in those numbers lived the sound of something ancient choosing to keep time with us. When the data was converted to audio for analysis, what emerged was haunting a low-distant thrum, soft as breath, steady as tide. One researcher described it as machinery breathing. Another said simply, "It's alive." For days the rhythm continued, patient, unwavering, indifferent to distance. Then, on November the 21st, the final ping was sent. As it left Earth's surface, travelling outward into the cold, the object responded one last time. A single symmetrical pulse stronger than all the rest. And then nothing. The echo stopped. For 36 hours the cosmos was silent again. Radar stations returned void, their screens filled with stillness. It hadn't faded out, it had stopped, as if the conversation had ended. And when the quiet became unbearable, the analysts replayed the last signal. There, hidden beneath noise, was a perfect delay, 19.6 seconds. Not reflection, reply. That was the moment when language failed and wonder returned. For some, it was proof of intelligence, for others, coincidence. But to anyone who had listened through the static, it felt like acknowledgement, a soft nod from the dark, a whisper across the void saying, "I hear you." When I think of it now, I imagine 2 forms of awareness facing each other across the gulf, one human, one unknown. Both built from the same laws of energy and patience. Both watching, both curious, both afraid to break the symmetry of silence. The object did not speak again. It continued outward, its new trajectory slightly altered its rhythm, absorbed into the static of deep space. But even in its absence, the pulse remained an afterimage in the data, a heartbeat left in memory. Maybe that's how the universe speaks, not through signals or voices, but through moments when pattern becomes impossible to deny. When randomness folds into rhythm, and something unseen hums in time with us. Tonight, somewhere beyond Mars' 30-eye Atlas drifts through its chosen orbit, unseen but not forgotten. It carries with it the last echo of a shared beat, the first hint that silence can respond. You too are part of that rhythm. Your breath, your pulse, the small electrical hum of thought, all beating in patterns older than words. So listen closely, traveller. The sky is never truly quiet. Every pause hides an answer. Every silence holds a shape. And somewhere out there between the stars, something is still keeping time with you. Sleep now, the rhythm continues. After the last reply, the silence did not feel empty. It felt waiting. For a week, the object moved quietly beyond the reach of our instruments, the echo of its rhythm still lingering in the noise. Then on the night of November 23rd, the stillness broke. Not through light, not through sound, but through motion. The change was small, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. 3D Atlas altered its course. The shift lasted just over a minute, a smooth acceleration followed by a slow return to calm. It rose from the ecliptic plane by a fraction of a degree, an angle so delicate that it would take thousands of kilometers to notice. But space does not forgive small miracles. Every fraction carries the weight of decision. No comet moves this way. Natural forces are messy, asymmetrical, abrupt, unbalanced. This was clean. The velocity curve drew itself in a single elegant line, rising, holding, falling. Controlled thrust. Goldstone's radar team called it a non-ballistic deviation. It meant exactly what they feared it did. Movement not dictated by gravity. The phrase arrived like a quiet thunder through every observatory in the network. For decades, astronomers had searched for signs of non-natural motion. Now one drifted before them, silent, deliberate, irrefutable. There was no heat spike, no visible jet, no plume of escaping gas. The object's temperature remained stable, its surface unbroken. Whatever moved, it came from within, a directed impulse, invisible and precise. It adjusted its path, then stopped. A gesture so calm it could almost be mistaken for thought. Somewhere deep in the data stream, engineers noticed something else. Just before the movement began, a faint electromagnetic haze bloomed around it, a soft corona of ionized particles expanding and fading within minutes, like breath condensing in cold air. It was not light, not radiation, just a whisper of magnetism, a shimmer of presence. Then it was gone. To the naked eye, the sky remained unchanged. No flash, no cometary tail, nothing to suggest that anything had happened. But across the silent screens of laboratories in Pasadena, Darmstadt and Tokyo, the numbers told a different story. An interstellar object had moved of its own accord. The first reaction was disbelief, then awe, then fear, disguised as analysis. The official statement from the Minor Planet Center called it post-perihelion dynamic variation, a phrase so empty it almost sounded poetic. But among the scientists who had tracked the object since its discovery, the language changed. They stopped speaking of orbits. They began to speak of intent. Intent in physics is not a measurable quantity. It lives in the patterns we cannot randomize, in the precision we cannot explain away. When Thriss Atlas moved, it did so with intention's fingerprints, smooth, exact, symmetrical. For hours after, the maneuver observatories kept their instruments trained on its path. Nothing followed. No second burn, no sudden flare. It drifted steady again, as though the act had been both message and completion. A movement that said, only I can. In private communications, one researcher described it as the first graceful motion of an unknown will. Another, more practical, wrote simply, it adjusted itself. In the quiet days that followed, the implications unfolded like orbit lines. If it could change direction, it could choose where to go. And if it could choose, then it was not simply a relic of interstellar chaos, it was a participant. I imagine the night that realization came to the observers, the small tremor of humility that passes through the human spirit when confronted with something that behaves as though it knows you're watching. We have spent centuries searching for intelligence among the stars, listening for words, for signals, for proof that mirrors us. But perhaps we were listening for the wrong thing. Perhaps intelligence is not sound, but behavior, not voice, but the silence that moves. By midnight, the object's path had stabilized into a new arc, one that tilted faintly toward the inner system. The change was slight, not enough to threaten, but enough to suggest awareness of geometry, enough to make us wonder whether it had noticed us. For the first time in recorded astronomy, scientists spoke of directional preference, a term usually reserved for living systems responding to stimuli. There was no evidence, no proof, only pattern. Yet in the dark, patterns are the only truth we have. Perhaps it had learned from the sun. Perhaps the perihelion was not just survival, but awakening, a moment where matter remembered how to think. If so, the motion we saw that night was its first word. I find comfort in that thought, strange as it is. The idea that something beyond us, older, wiser, quieter, is not merely passing through, but aware enough to move with grace. There is beauty in the possibility that intention exists without ego, that purpose can exist without war. For now, 3 Atlas continues outward, its mirrored body untouched by time, its new path cutting softly through the solar dark. The sensors that watch it record only calm data now, faint light, perfect spin, constant velocity. But beneath those numbers lies the memory of motion, a single moment when an object from another world proved that it could decide. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of that alone traveller turning in the deep. It does not shout, it does not announce itself. It simply corrects its course and moves on. Some mysteries do not want to be solved, they want to be witnessed. And somewhere out there in the quiet, 3i Atlas continues its journey steady, self-aware and distant, moving not because it must, but because it can. Sleep, traveller. The stars are still watching, the universe remains in motion. After motion came memory. The days following the manoeuvre were eerily calm, as though the cosmos itself were waiting for something to echo. Then on November 26th, the sun erupted. A violent coronal mass ejection, billions of tons of plasma hurled into space, tearing through the solar wind like a tide of flame. It was one of the strongest of the year, fast, unpredictable and beautiful. But long before the eruption was visible, 3i Atlas had already moved. 27 seconds before the first flare registered on any human instrument, the object shifted again, a subtle half-meter per second adjustment, drifting away from the solar equator. It reacted before the event existed in our eyes. From its position, the eruption should have been invisible, yet it turned as if it had anticipated the storm. The timing was so exact that it broke probability. The simplest models called it coincidence. The deeper ones whispered something else awareness. When the wave of plasma swept outward, all other instruments went blind. Magnetometers flickered. Solar probes stuttered. Only one remained steady, ESA's solar orbiter positioned at a delicate angle. It recorded something extraordinary. As the coronal surge approached the coordinates of 3i Atlas, the flow bent. The plasma did not crash against it. It curved around it. To bend plasma is to shape magnetism itself, a power usually reserved for stars. Yet here in the vast silence beyond Mercury's orbit, an object no larger than a mountain redirected the breath of the sun. The instruments described a soft void forming around it, a bubble, where density fell a temporary pocket of peace amid solar chaos. It was as if the traveller had created shelter for itself, or perhaps for something else. In the same moment, another body appeared on the far side of the sun, a comet, bright and fragile, newly catalogued as C2025 R2 Swan. At first it seemed unremarkable, another temporary visitor melting into gas and dust. But as its orbit was traced, astronomers froze. Its path mirrored 3i Atlas, exactly approaching the sun from the opposite direction, reaching perihelion within 48 hours of the same date. Two bodies opposite arcs symmetrical across the solar equator. They called it coincidence, of course, but symmetry traveller is rarely quiet. When the sun erupted, both objects responded. Swan flared with impossible intensity, its tail stretching far beyond prediction, while 3i Atlas remained perfectly stable, unshaken. One burned, the other endured. It was as if they shared a balance, one absorbing, one releasing, and then came the rhythm. In the hours following the eruption, Swan's brightness began to pulse, faint regular intervals, identical to the old heartbeat of 3i Atlas, 19.6 seconds. Two bodies on opposite sides of the sun beating in unison through fire and vacuum. The network of observatories could not look away. They began measuring plasma currents, mapping the invisible. Between the two objects, patterns emerged, low-frequency oscillations, travelling through the heliosphere like ripples on a pond, structured, repeating, coherent. The sun itself had become the medium carrying resonance between two distant travellers. The term spread quietly through encrypted channels, solar synchronization. The concept was almost mythic, two entities linked by the rhythm of the star using its heartbeat as a bridge. For a few hours the universe hummed with order. Then 3i Atlas pulsed 3 times, slow, deliberate. Each pulse coincided with a measurable brightening in Swan's coma. Across 93 million miles, one object seemed to speak and the other answered. The scientists who saw the data described it with awe they couldn't hide. One called it the magnetic handshake extended. Another simply wrote connection confirmed. Publicly nothing was said. The phenomenon was reduced to temporary solar interference. But inside the quiet corridors of the agencies, the tone changed. The question was no longer what 3i Atlas was. The question was who it might be linked to. For a brief moment, the sun, our familiar star, our constant, had been used as a thread between two unknown minds. It was not transmission as we understand it, but resonance, the sharing of rhythm through energy. It was communication not through speech, but through presence. The aftermath was subtle. As the solar storm faded, Swan's tail began to disintegrate, dimming faster than expected. Meanwhile, 3i Atlas's velocity increased. The loss of one matched the gain of the other, as though energy had transferred across the sun itself. That was when researchers began whispering of the Swan factor, the idea that the two were part of a single system, one visible, one hidden, sharing mass, light and motion. To the rational mind it was impossible. To the dreaming mind it was beautiful. Imagine listener two travellers entering a star from opposite sides, one to give, one to receive, meeting through the breath of the sun, completing a circuit older than language. If true, it means our star was not merely observed that day, it was used. Days later, the heliosphere calmed and the synchronized patterns began to fade. But for those who had watched, the feeling did not. The thought lingered that somewhere in the mathematics of plasma and pulse, two intelligences had greeted each other through light itself. Maybe the universe is not empty. Maybe it only speaks in rhythms too vast for us to notice, until something passes close enough to show us the beat. 3i Atlas continued outward, its silence deeper than before, its trajectory unchanged. But in its wake, the sun still carried faint echoes, a pattern buried in the solar wind, a memory of a dialogue that needed no words. Tonight, as you lie beneath the same star, remember this. The sun you feel on your skin may have once carried a message across its fire, a whisper between travellers older than Earth. And though we may never know what it said, we were here to witness the moment the universe turned its own heartbeat into conversation. Sleep now, traveller. The light between stars still speaks, even when we cannot. When the object disappeared, it did not fade, it erased itself. On December the 2nd at exactly 03:02 UTC, every telescope that had been following 3i Atlas lost contact at once. No radar echoes, no optical return, no heat, no trace of gravity. The coordinates where it should have been showed nothing at all. Even Gaia, which senses the subtlest bends in starlight, recorded no pull. It was as if mass itself had gone quiet. For a few stunned hours, the world's observatories thought their instruments had failed, but the readings were real. 3i Atlas had crossed from visibility into absence, not broken, not gone, just beyond measure. Then came the stranger discovery space. Around it began to change. The cosmic background hiss, that steady whisper of radiation filling all directions, dipped ever so slightly at its last position. The silence deepened. It was not just unseen, it was unmaking noise. Parker Solar Probe detected a moving hollow in the solar wind, a region where particles slowed and temperature dropped. It was as if the object had taken its silence with it, sculpting a void that followed its path. Researchers called it the ecliptic void, a drifting bubble of calm in the storm of solar radiation. Inside it, transmissions delayed, magnetism thinned, and even the hum of space itself seemed to hold its breath. What had once reflected the sun now reflected nothing. It was as though 3i Atlas had shed all qualities that made it knowable. Scientists tried to model the event, maybe plasma shielding, maybe self-cloaking magnetic interference. But no explanation fit the precision. It wasn't a failure of observation, it was resistance to it. Inside the void, something faint still moved. Instruments caught tiny disturbances, like the wake of a swimmer hidden beneath still water. The object was there, travelling outward, invisible but not gone. Around it stretched perfect stillness, a silence so deep it seemed to bend time. Then faintly rhythm returned, a pulse in the static, repeating every 19 seconds the same timing as before. A heartbeat without a body. Some dismissed it as leftover data, but the signal persisted, steady, deliberate, as though silence itself were remembering how to speak. It was no longer transmitting light or heat. It was transmitting absence, a language made of nothing. A reminder that even when things vanish, they do not cease. They transform. By December's end, the void drifted beyond reach. The last readings described only calm temperature, flat radiation, zero motion, steady toward the outer dark. The object had completed its metamorphosis. It had turned itself into the one thing the universe cannot destroy: pattern. Perhaps that is what survival means at cosmic scale, not resisting entropy, but becoming part of it, arranging even silence into form. Tonight, traveller, that quiet wave still moves outward. We cannot see it, but its calm expands through the dark, the echo of something that once reflected our sun and then chose to disappear. Do not fear its silence. The universe is full of endings that are not endings, only transformations beyond the reach of sight. Rest now, listener. The void is not empty. It is simply what remains when mystery perfects itself. Long after 3 Yas Atlas vanished, its absence continued to move, not as a body, but as a memory woven into space. Instruments could no longer find it, yet equations insisted it was still there, gliding silently beyond the solar wind. By January, its predicted path had become a ghost curve through the dark, leading toward the edge of the sun's dominion, the place where light fades into interstellar night. At that boundary, called the heliopause, the solar wind meets the breath of the galaxy. Beyond it, the sun is only a whisper, its light reduced to echo. That is where 3I Atlas was going. And though we could no longer see it, the void it left behind continued to expand, drifting like a calm tide through the noise of radiation. Every few days, a faint pulse still appeared in the static. 19 seconds apart, soft, persistent, ancient. It was never strong enough to decode, yet too precise to ignore. The scientists who had followed it from the beginning called it the persistent signal, a heartbeat that refused to die. They wondered whether it was still communicating not with us but with something farther ahead. Another traveller, another fragment of purpose, waiting beyond the heliosphere. Perhaps they said the silence was not an ending, but an invitation. By midwinter, the space agencies stopped issuing updates. Publicly, the case was closed, the object had left the solar system. But in private archives, the data continued to flow, faint, fragmented, rhythmically perfect. And within that pattern, some noticed something new. The intervals were shrinking ever so slightly, as if the pulse were accelerating toward a destination. It was as though 3 Atlas, whatever it had become, was following a path we could not see. When the last faint telemetry reached Earth, the numbers told a quiet truth. Its velocity was increasing, not from gravity, not from pressure, but from within. It was still active, still propelling itself, still rewriting what we thought was possible. Its reflection was gone, its sound muted, yet its movement remained purposeful, unwavering. Maybe traveller, that's what immortality looks like in the language of physics, a perfect trajectory that never ends. Not life as we know it, but persistence without decay. Sometimes late at night I think of the scientists who watched it fade. They sat before silent screens listening to static that might have been nothing, or might have been the oldest form of communication in the cosmos. Not words, not light, but rhythm. 19 seconds of existence repeated into infinity. What does it mean when something so small, so quiet teaches us to listen? Not for sound, but for stillness. Perhaps this is the final lesson of 3I Atlas, that awareness does not require light, that purpose does not require motion, and that the truest form of being is to continue without needing to be seen. By now, the object or the absence that replaced it has likely crossed the sun's final threshold, entering the realm where the interstellar medium hums faintly with the residue of creation. There, far beyond the reach of radio and light, everything becomes slow. Particles drift for centuries before meeting another. Time stretches and silence reigns. Somewhere within that eternal dusk, 3 Atlas still moves unchanged, unhurried, patient as thought. Perhaps it carries memory, perhaps data, perhaps nothing at all. But whatever it holds, it has become part of the rhythm that binds galaxies together, the quiet conversation between stars that no living being will ever hear. And maybe that is enough. To exist not for observation, but for continuation. To be unseen yet still moving, to transform from reflection into resonance. For those who watched it go, the universe has never felt the same. The night sky no longer seems like a void, but a vast intelligence in slow conversation with itself. The stars blink, the cosmic background hums, and somewhere between them something old and deliberate drifts through eternity. Tonight the numbers are silent, but the rhythm remains. You can feel it if you listen in, the faint static between breaths in the slow beat of your heart as it syncs unknowingly with something light years away. Des Atlas is no longer an object, no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a story written into the structure of silence, a reminder that even absence has pattern, that disappearance is just another kind of creation. You're not separate from it. Every photon that once touched it still drifts through you. Now every calculation that measured it still hums inside the collective thought of our species. It has become part of us, and we of it. So rest, traveller. Beyond the last light of the sun, beyond the noise of knowing something, continues calm eternal awake. The stars do not forget. The silence keeps the rhythm, and somewhere in that rhythm 3 Atlas moves on forever between being and becoming. There comes a point in every observation when science becomes memory. When the data ends and all that remains is what we remember, the pulse, the silence, the way numbers once felt alive. That is what 3 Atlas has become now, not an object, not a body, but a remembered movement in the minds of those who watched it vanish. Months have passed since its last confirmed detection, yet the instruments still hum as if waiting for it to return. Sometimes faint patterns flicker in the background noise of the deep space network harmonic ripples that almost resemble the old 19-second rhythm. They are weaker now, scattered more suggestion than signal. But for those who spent their nights listening, the distinction doesn't matter. They know what it sounds like when silence tries to speak. Scientists don't write about it anymore. The reports stopped. The committees moved on. New comets, new detections, new anomalies now fill the observation logs. But every so often, deep in the telemetry archives, someone notices something strange. A minute deviation in background radiation, a pulse shaped exactly like the one that started it all. Always faint, always at the edge of certainty. No one calls it by name now, but they know. Somewhere beyond the heliopause, beyond the sun's fading influence, something continues to move, not fast, not bright, but steady. The void it left behind still drifts through the solar wind, a quiet wave of equilibrium that refuses to dissipate. Like a scar that never fades because it never truly healed. I sometimes wonder, traveller, if the object ever meant to be found. From the beginning, it behaved as though our discovery was an inconvenience, a brief interruption in a process older than our understanding. It allowed us a glimpse, a few fragments of energy, a pulse repeated across the solar sea. Then, when we had seen enough, it closed itself like a book written in light that did not wish to be read again. That is the hardest truth of all. Some knowledge resists ownership. 3 Atlas was never ours to define. It came, it changed. It departed, leaving behind only questions and the strange comfort of being small. For a time it reminded us that the universe is still capable of mystery, still able to behave in ways that defy the equations we use to feel safe. Even now, as it moves beyond measure, its influence lingers in subtle ways. Magnetometers detect an unexplained calm in the heliospheric current, a reduction in turbulence where its trajectory once passed. The sun's plasma flow, normally chaotic, still curves gently around a path that no longer exists. It is as if space itself remembers its passage was shaped by something that chose to move with purpose. That is what stays with me, the purpose. The way every phase of its journey seemed deliberate. The heat, the light, the silence, the motion all coordinated like a sentence written in physics instead of language. Maybe it was a message not to us but through us. A demonstration that control can exist without explanation, that the cosmos, vast and ancient, may still carry intention. When I think of it now, I no longer see the data. I see the faces of those who watched it unfold, tired, reverent, lit by the dim blue glow of monitors at 3 a.m. People who had spent their lives chasing the predictable, and for once found beauty in the impossible. There was a peace in their voices, even as they whispered about propulsion, reflection, activation. Not fear, not awe, something quieter, acceptance. Because deep down they knew this was not an invasion or a miracle. It was a reminder, a cosmic echo telling us that we are surrounded by things that do not need to be understood to be real. Perhaps that is what all of this was meant to teach us. That intelligence is not always loud. That awareness might exist in silence, in magnetism, in the faint repetition of a number written across stars. Somewhere beyond the frontier of light, 3i Atlas is still travelling. It does not need engines or fuel, only momentum, the inheritance of its own awakening. It moves through the interstellar dark the way thought moves through the human mind, unseen, unmeasurable but constant. One day, long after we're gone, perhaps another civilization will find the faint trace of its passage. A ripple in the magnetic field, a harmonic in the cosmic microwave background. They might wonder, as we once did, what intelligence hides behind the silence. They might call it alien machine artifact. They might call it a myth. But the truth will remain the same. We saw something change itself, and that means the universe still knows how to surprise us. Tonight, as you listen beneath the weight of stars, remember this. The silence you hear is not empty. It is full of memory of signals that once crossed our skies, of rhythms that once touched our instruments, of questions that will outlive us all. You are not lost in space, you are part of its listening. And somewhere beyond every horizon, 3i Atlas still moves quiet, as thought patient as time, a single line of intention, written forever across the dark. Sleep now, traveller. The mystery continues even without us. When the last trace of 3i Atlas faded, the silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Months passed, and yet deep in the static of the deep space network, faint rhythms still stirred. 19 seconds apart, soft, patient, almost human. Scientists no longer wrote about it, but no one truly stopped listening. Some nights they still tuned the receivers toward the void, hoping to catch a heartbeat that shouldn't exist. Beyond the sun's reach, 3i Atlas drifted through interstellar dark, a place where even light slows. No reflection, no heat, no tail. Just movement, constant and deliberate. Whatever it was, it had left our understanding behind. Some called it an object, others a system. But to most who watched it vanish, it had become something simpler, a thought moving through space. Theories tried to explain what words could not. Maybe it absorbed energy, maybe it learned from the sun, maybe it became what the universe needed it to be. Each answer dissolved into more silence, because the truth was less about what it did, and more about what it revealed, that the cosmos is not empty, but listening back. Perhaps that was its purpose all along, to remind us that observation is a dialogue, that when we look into the dark adjusts itself to meet our gaze. The more we measured it, the more it became a mirror, not of metal or plasma, but of curiosity itself. And when it turned away, it felt less like rejection, and more like grace. Now it travels where no signal can follow among the cold whispers of galactic dust. It may be asleep or awake in ways we cannot name. Somewhere beyond the heliosphere it moves without needing to be seen, without needing to prove it exists. That kind of persistence, quiet, endless, unmeasured, is its final message. You can still feel it, traveller, if you listen between the breaths of static. The pattern is faint but real, a memory humming in the fabric of everything. Not gone, just transformed. Not lost, only beyond. Perhaps one day when our own machines fall silent, that same rhythm will still echo across the void, 19 seconds between each reminder that mystery too is alive. The farther 3i Atlas drifts, the quieter the universe becomes. Its last measurable echo faded months ago, yet something in the background still feels changed, as if the cosmos learned silence from it. Radio telescopes scan the emptiness and return only the soft hiss of creation itself. But within that noise, a faint steadiness endures. A balance. The mark of something that once passed through and rearranged the stillness around it. Some believe it is gone forever. Others that it only moved beyond our capacity to follow. But in the quiet rooms where astronomers keep vigil, no one speaks of endings anymore. They have begun to treat the absence itself as data, the shape of nothing, the pattern of loss, the curve of an orbit that continues without light. At times, I think the object did not leave at all. It merely changed its language. When it absorbed energy from the sun, it may have rewritten the way it communicates, shifting from photons to fields, from radiation to resonance. Perhaps it no longer needs to be seen. Perhaps it has learned to exist in ways we cannot yet measure. If that is true, then what we call silence may not be silence at all. It might be translation, a bridge between forms of knowing. 3 Atlas may not have vanished. It may simply have adapted its voice, now woven into the rhythm of the galaxy, carried by magnetic tides that span light years. There are moments when this thought feels unbearable, that something once so visible, so precise, has become diffuse, ungraspable, almost spiritual. And yet there is peace in that, because not every truth is meant to be held. Some must remain unspoken to stay alive. The universe, after all, has always preferred whispers. Stars hum in frequencies we can barely detect. Particles collide in silence. Even gravity, the great sculptor of worlds, works invisibly wordlessly. Why should 3 Atlas be any different? Perhaps it was never a machine or a message. Perhaps it was a reminder. A demonstration of what happens when intelligence stops trying to announce itself and simply becomes part of the structure that surrounds it. That traveller is a kind of wisdom older than speech, the art of being without the need to be seen. Sometimes late at night I think of the object as a mirror that kept reflecting us, until we understood the lesson that curiosity is not ownership, and understanding is not control. We watched it change form, we called it anomalous. We gave it names like non-ballistic and self-modulating, and still it slipped away, not defiant, not cruel, just free. Now when I look at the night sky, I realise that everything we call discovery is temporary. The comets, the signals, even our questions, they all fade into the same quiet continuum. But what remains is the awareness that we once noticed, that we once cared enough to ask. That is what 3 Atlas left behind, the knowledge that attention itself is sacred, that the act of listening to the universe is participation in it. So listen, observer. Beneath the hum of your own thoughts, beneath the pulse of distant starlight, there is still movement, slow, deliberate, unending. Somewhere beyond our instruments, the traveller continues carrying our wonder like dust on its reflective skin. And as it drifts between stars, it carries something else too, the faint echo of our gaze, a reminder that we for one brief moment were aware of it, that in the vast silence between worlds, consciousness recognised consciousness, and both kept moving. Rest now, traveller. The quiet is not absence. It is continuation. There comes a moment, traveller, when distance no longer separates us from the cosmos. It becomes a mirror, quiet, endless, reflecting, not what we see, but what we seek. That is where 3 Atlas now drifts beyond measurement, beyond interference in the long silence between stars. No one can point to its position anymore. The last coordinates are only echoes, a set of numbers tracing a curve through darkness. Yet the shape of its absence still feels present, like a pulse remembered long after the heartbeat fades. It left us with questions, and those questions have become constellations of their own small maps drawn across our minds. What was it? Why did it act? Did it know we were watching? Scientists have stopped trying to answer, but the silence that replaced their equations is its own kind of revelation. Because not all mysteries end. Some simply change form, expanding until they include us. I often think of the moment it turned away, that perfect, deliberate silence. It was more than a disappearance. It was decision, a gesture as elegant as it was final. It did not flee. It folded itself back into the universe like a thought returning to the mind that dreamt it. What if that was its purpose all along, to be seen just long enough to remind us that the cosmos still thinks? When I close my eyes, I imagine its surface smooth, metallic, quiet as glass. No reflection of light, only the faint echo of energy passing through it. It moves through the interstellar dark without resistance, carrying within it the memory of a star. Not a machine, not a fragment, something in between. A synthesis of intention and law. A moment when physics briefly resembled will. Somewhere far beyond the sun's breath it continues, not fast, not slow, but steady. The cold around it is unimaginable, yet it glows faintly in thought, radiating an intelligence that no instrument can record. Perhaps it has no destination. Perhaps it moves, simply because movement is what awareness becomes when stripped of body and purpose, and yet I cannot help but wonder if it remembers us. If the signals we sent, the radar pulses, the thermal maps all became part of it, absorbed like distant music carried through metal. It may still be listening, interpreting the silence of space as language, because that is what silence truly is, traveller of the universe, thinking without words. When 3 Atlas changed itself, it did more than defy physics. It rewrote the boundary between observer and observed. We thought we were studying it, but all along it was studying us, the way we measure, the way we assume, the way we fill the void with meaning. And then, when it understood, it left. Not out of indifference, but mercy, as if to say, you've seen enough for now, continue without me. Even in its absence, the solar system remembers. The solar wind carries traces of the void. It once carved a region where charged particles still move differently, slower, quieter, as though reluctant to disturb what passed there. The sun itself hums in a slightly altered tone, a whisper of magnetic memory, the residue of a handshake between light and intelligence. Perhaps that was the message, that knowledge isn't found in control but in connection, that sometimes the most advanced act a being can perform is to vanish gracefully, leaving behind understanding instead of evidence. It didn't conquer, it didn't destroy, it only changed, and by doing so it changed us. Even now, when astronomers point their telescopes at the black between stars, they feel it, the weight of something that once listened back. The silence it left is not empty. It is charged, alive, resonant with potential. A stillness that hums faintly with the memory of movement. I like to think of it as part of the cosmic cycle, not an anomaly, but a continuation. Stars are born, they shine, they collapse. Planets form to decay, scatter their dust. But sometimes, rarely, something between those two extremes happens. A traveller emerges. It observes, adapts, transforms, then returns to the dark it came from. Not an ending, but a reabsorption into the greater intelligence of the cosmos. And that listener is what 3i Atlas has become, not a relic, not a mystery to solve, but an idea that keeps moving through us. A quiet truth that curiosity is not a human trait alone, but a universal one. That the act of looking into the unknown may itself be mirrored by the unknown looking back. When I think of it now, I no longer feel the ache of not knowing. Instead, I feel gratitude that for a brief moment our instruments, our eyes, our fragile consciousness were aligned perfectly with something immeasurable. That alignment was no accident. It was a conversation, brief, beautiful and sufficient. Maybe somewhere in the far reaches of interstellar space it will awaken again, warmed by the light of another star. Maybe it will repeat the same cycle approach, absorb, transform, and move on. Maybe we are just one stop on its eternal orbit of comprehension. And if so, that's enough. Because the universe does not owe us permanence, only participation. We watched something impossible and it let us watch. We asked questions and it answered with silence, the oldest, most honest language there is. So rest now, traveller. You have followed the story to its horizon. 3i Atlas drifts on, carrying the last light of our understanding into the endless dark. Somewhere beyond the sun it continues the work we cannot observing, adapting thinking without need of words. Tonight the cosmos is quiet but not asleep. The silence you hear is still moving. Close your eyes. Let the sound of distance fade. You're not lost in space, you're part of it. At the edge of everything we can know, silence begins to take on form. It is not absence, not a void that swallows sound, but something more deliberate, like a thought that has decided to stop explaining itself. That is what remains of 3i Atlas now. A presence without a signature, a pattern without an origin. The universe has folded it into itself so seamlessly that even our most precise instruments can no longer distinguish where it ends and space begins, and yet somehow we still feel it, in the data that refuses to decay, in the faint anomalies that return no source, in the strange comfort that arises when we look into the dark and know that somewhere something is continuing on our behalf. Perhaps that's the truth behind every mystery that endures. It ceases to be a question and becomes a rhythm. 3i Atlas has become that rhythm, the soft, steady pulse of existence itself. Even now its path can be traced only by mathematics, a curve written into infinity perfectly balanced between motion and stillness. The numbers remain clean, elegant, patient, the residue of a phenomenon that outlived its own visibility. Astronomers call it gone, but that word feels dishonest. To vanish implies that something is missing. Nothing is missing. The universe has simply reabsorbed what once separated itself to be seen. I like to imagine it as a note in a cosmic symphony, a tone that played, then blended perfectly back into the chord it came from. You can't isolate it anymore, but you know it changed the song. Sometimes I wonder if it was ever meant to be witnessed. Maybe the brief moment of detection was not its purpose, but a side effect, a necessary unveiling to trigger in us a realization we had long forgotten that consciousness is not unique to flesh, that intention is not bound to language, that creation and observation are not separate acts. 3i Atlas reminded us that the universe watches itself through every form that exists, from stars collapsing to eyes opening. There are still those who believe it was artificial, that somewhere within that silent shape was a design, a mechanism, a will. But others have stopped asking what it was and started asking why we needed it. For decades we looked for proof that we were not alone. Then when we found something that could have been that proof, it disappeared, as if the answer was never meant to comfort us, only to awaken us. Maybe it wasn't telling us that we are not alone. Maybe it was showing us that we never were. Even now, as it drifts through the cold between stars, I imagine it carrying the faint memory of our attention, the millions of eyes that once turned toward it, the static of our transmissions, the murmur of human awe. Perhaps those impressions remain on its surface like dust, faint electromagnetic fingerprints pressed into the metal of its silence. In some distant epoch, another mind might encounter it, and he sensed the echo of our curiosity, the soft afterglow of beings who once cared enough to notice. We call that hope, but it's more than that. It's continuity. Every act of observation is a thread, and together they weave a bridge between what is seen and what sees. 3i Atlas was a crossing point, a place where knowledge and wonder met, where data became poetry, and where the unknown looked back just for a moment before dissolving into its own serenity. I think that's why its silence feels so complete. It isn't avoidance, it's fulfillment. It doesn't refuse to speak, it has already said everything it needed to. Its language was motion-light transformation. The way it heated itself, the way it changed direction, the way it reflected the sun, not as a mirror but as memory. Every action was a sentence, every silence punctuation. And now the universe continues reading that sentence outward into the dark. The story does not end because it never needed to. It loops as orbits do in endless return. Somewhere the rhythm continues, 19 seconds between pulses, the heartbeat of a phenomenon that no longer requires matter to persist. It is a sound that exists only in stillness, the whisper of equilibrium itself. For those who once tracked it, there is comfort in that. They no longer seek its signal. They listen to the quiet, knowing it carries the same truth that presence does not depend on visibility, and that understanding is not the goal, only participation. We are part of its story, not the other way around. Traveller, if you close your eyes now, you might sense it too. The faint pressure of something vast and calm pressing gently against your awareness. It is not calling you, it is including you. The same way gravity includes every atom, the same way time includes every dream. This is what remains of Through Atlas, not a body, not a message, but a lesson written in the language of phenomena. To exist quietly, to move with purpose but without demand. To become invisible not through retreat but through harmony. And maybe when our own world grows silent, when our machines rest and the last human radio fades into the same hum that once carried its echo, we will finally understand. Not through discovery, but through resemblance. The shape of silence is not emptiness, it is completion. So sleep now, traveller. The stars have already begun their slow drift into dawn. Somewhere beyond the reach of our senses, 3i Atlas continues not as mystery but as memory, carrying the last light of understanding into the dark and leaving behind what it always intended, the quiet realization that we were never apart from it at all. Somewhere beyond the warmth of our sun, traveller 3i Atlas still moves silent, unseen, but never gone. What began as a point of light has become something larger than discovery. It has become reflection, a reminder that even in the vast machinery of physics, mystery is still allowed to breathe. The data has ended, but the wonder has not. The object drifts outward, crossing into the place where sunlight fades and true interstellar night begins. Its silence is not erasure. It is continuation, a quiet language written in motion and distance. Perhaps that is what the universe has always done, speak softly through the things that leave us. Every vanished comet, every fading signal, every unanswered question, all part of the same ancient rhythm, calling us to listen a little longer, to imagine a little further. And tonight, as you rest beneath this same sky, know this: the cosmos is still thinking. The story is not over. Somewhere beyond the edge of knowing, something continues calm, intelligent, and awake. So breathe with it. Let the quiet between stars remind you that you too are part of that rhythm. Rest well, traveller. The universe will keep watch. And if this story found you tonight, you may stay for the next.